And welcome everyone to a brand new episode of Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of Dive Cuts. We're in season 8 already, and if you are tuning in for the first time, we are the only Missouri basketball podcast on the entire internet. How about that? So I'm your host, Sam Snelling. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see me on your left. Please take a moment to hit the like button below. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can sort of help this channel grow a bit. And then on the right side of your screen is Matt Watkins. Matt, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
I have many complaints at the moment, but we're gonna keep this show light because they're not really Missouri basketball related. We are just in the early stages of what I think both of us would kind of consider our basketball preseason. It is October 3rd. It's Thursday evening, and you and I are going to talk about Missouri basketball when a whole lot of other people are actually thinking about this Missouri football game that's going to happen on Saturday morning at Kyle Field. But our official sort of preseason coverage kicked off on Monday with some of our player previews. You and our colleague Matt Harris have been hard at work on getting those primed and ready to go. In the meantime, I have been plugging away at the SEC team previews. So we're going to have a really good look at what Missouri has and what the rest of the SEC has. Without a whole lot of Missouri basketball news to talk about at the moment, I mean, I guess we could bring up that we're still kind of where we were 2 weeks ago with Davion Hannah. Mizzou seems like they're in a good spot there. He's taking another visit, or did he took a visit to Cincinnati, and I think that's the rest of the visits that are done. He did cancel a visit to Pitt. And so I think we're at the stages now where we're sort of expecting a decision. I don't know, at some point. But no real news there. So we're going to talk about actual basketball that's going to be happening in really just about a month. You spent a lot of the offseason going through and trying to project the entire transfer class, the SEC. The final work was impressive. It was a lot to get through for you, but we do have it helps have a general idea of what the rest of the league is going to look like. And then on top of that, you went into even further detail on the Missouri basketball Tigers, and that's something that you've recently put up on the Rock M Plus forums. If you are not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. rockm.plus on the interwebs, and the forums, which were just upgraded, look great. And Matt Watkins has his projections there. So let me we can pull those up. So what was the sort of thought process when you were kind of going through, and what were you trying to accomplish when you're kind of going through these things?
Well, the idea here, at least for me, is that, going into a season, you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at as far as the roster, who's going to play what minutes and what have you. But I tried to get a little bit more specific than that. And I've used several methods to create my madness, but in a very general sense, the coaching staff has kind of established a playing rotation. With Mizzou, it's a little bit deeper than most teams. Last year got a little funky due to injuries and underperformance, but you can basically bank on 10, 11 guys in a Dennis Gates team, or a Leonard Hamilton team for that matter, playing each night. And those two coaches I found have been pretty similar, at least up until last year. You don't see a whole lot of guys playing over 30 minutes a game. That's a rarity. When you get down to the 9th, 10th, 11th players on the bench, they're not just coming in during mop-up time. They're playing first half minutes. Obviously, they're not playing as much as the guys at the top of the rotation, but that's why it's important to kind of get a feel for what team you're looking at and how many minutes are kind of distributed down the ladder. with Mizzou, for returning players, I looked at kind of how they were used last year. Went back and looked at a little bit of projections. Well, not projections, actually. In this one, I looked at a little evidence of how freshmen would translate to sophomore seasons during the Hamilton regime in Florida State to kind of get an idea of how many more minutes that they're expected to get, how much better they get. Published all that way last winter during the midst of the winless conference season. That's available on Rock M Nation if you are really interested in it still. But then I kind of looked at the players individually about what attributes they have, how they can fit with one another. And finally, what I did with the transfers with the SEC, Mizzou as well, I went and comped each incoming player to a group of 10 most similar transfers over the last 3 years. And I kind of bucketed them into two categories: the up transfers, meaning going from a lower mid-major up to a high major, versus the lateral transfers, which came from high major to another high major. And I looked at kind of how their numbers would be expected to shift to kind of get a baseline expectation of what you're looking at. So it's a lot of words to say that I've used many, many different methods, some which are a little more speculative than others, to arrive at a preseason projected minutes and usage rate for each player in Mizzou's roster.
Yeah, so I'm going to put this up on the screen for anybody who's watching us on YouTube. You can kind of see where we're what we're getting at. So this is a sneak peek behind the scenes at the Rock M Plus forums, new forums. So these are basically the projections that Watkins has come up with. Mm-hmm. Now it is one of those things where it is interesting as you kind of go through this, and as I was kind of going through a similar thing, like trying to determine, how a player is going to be used. So that's determining like how many minutes and what the usage is going to be, how that player is going to use those minutes, which would be like, getting into like the usage side of it, or sorry, the offensive rating side of it. Mm-hmm. And being able to, essentially like take out all of this data and apply it almost kind of in a template way to like what we can kind of expect to get from this team. And so when I was trying to rethink how we're going to do the SEC team previews, I was basically taking like a lot of your ideas for what you're doing with players, taking the data that we, I guess, have available to us, because for everything that you did with the transfers, which I did use, and I used like almost all that data. Some of the like minutes projections ended up having to be tweaked because one of the things that I started doing was actually trying to figure out how a coach is most likely to use those, the players that they have. Like, and it is interesting when you go back and like the perception, for example, is John Calipari doesn't really use a deep bench. He relies heavily on, probably 6-7 guys, has, 2 to 3 guys who are like way up there in their usage rates. And then you have somebody coming into Kentucky this year where Mark Pope has a bit of a reputation of being a guy who's going to use a deeper bench, and he's not going to have anybody who's super high usage. And so when you look at the construction of everybody's roster, it's sort of easy to figure out, where those things can slot, with some obvious, I guess, questions on, maybe this guy's going to be in slot, like looking at Missouri as an example. Like, I think everybody sort of figures that, our top 3 are going to be, Perkins, Mitchell, Bates. Once you get past that, there is some assumptions that we're making. Like, I think you and I, like, we mostly agree on a lot of this stuff. And it's like, okay, like, Caleb Grill is going to, be a little bit more of a fixture because obviously he's got a lot of experience. Coaches like experience. He doesn't screw up a lot. Coaches like that. versus somebody like Honor Boateng, who maybe has a higher ceiling, but brings a lot more variance into the equation when you
Mm-hmm.
play him more.
And with Caleb Grill, we have last year as direct evidence of that, which is one of the helpful things. For
right, yeah.
Early on the year, that's about the minutes he was playing. So different cast, obviously, so there could be a difference here, and he might perform better or worse. We don't know, but that is another telltale indication of with 10 newcomers, you've got one returner or one specific returner here that we're talking about that, he kind of fits in the same way.
And getting, Division I transfers, which, I think is one of the things that's really kind of changed up a lot of how we have to look at this. And for anybody that didn't listen or hasn't listened yet, I would recommend going back and listening to the interview that I had with Ken Pomeroy last week, where we got into a little bit of this and trying to determine, like the impact of transfers, because you do have more information on, how this player is going to perform. Now, clearly, like, Marquez Warwick, as an example, as a guy who's coming from, a heavy load playing at Northern Kentucky to a much sort of more reserved role at Missouri. He's not going to need to play 80 to 90% of the minutes. He's not going to need to be, 30% usage. Missouri just needs him to be, available and efficient, and probably play about half the time, which is why he's kind of coming in at about 51% of the minutes. But it is one of those things where it's a lot easier to guess how a player like that will be able to step in, with a lesser role than even a guy, looking at kind of the bottom, like, Marcus Allen or Teo Barrett or Trent Burns, guys who, we're all very excited about, but still have a lot more unknowns.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that was also helpful when I was going through and making comparisons for all the transfers. You kind of got an idea for how things worked as far as taking a Marquez work, moving up to the high major level. There's a lot of guys, believe it or not, that have somewhat similar profiles to him moving from a low major to a high major. And you can kind of see how those guys move. And most of the time, you're going to see what we've projected here, a guy who drops down in minutes, takes a couple fewer shots, but actually gets more efficient in the process. This is all, again, posted on Rock M Plus, but if you want more details on this, but there's several comps that I got from Marquez work that are almost right on the head as far as what they did in their last season, and how those guys translated. It was pretty similar. I mean, there weren't guys who were going off and becoming NBA players all of a sudden, and guys who just completely fall off the radar. Sure, there's a couple out of a huge swath of players, but for the most part, you can kind of see how they're going to project up. Granted, it depends on which team they're going to, what the team needs. But with Mizzou next year, I mean, they've imported a lot of talent between the freshmen and the transfers. So I don't think it's, absent injuries or off the court issues or what have you. I don't think it's going to be a situation where a guy like Warwick is asked to, like, here's the ball, go score for 40 minutes. I don't think it's going to be that type of situation. And those are usually where the guys either really overachieve or really fail for his profile. So that's kind of how I looked at it for each and every one of the incoming transfers. And, Tony Perkins and Mark Mitchell didn't have a whole lot of comps, which is a good thing. Those guys are pretty rare.
Yeah.
You don't often get a all Big Ten second team senior transferring to another high major. That's rare. You don't generally have a former 5-star starter at Duke who's putting up good numbers but didn't quite have the role he wanted. You usually don't see those guys transferring to another school. So those were a little bit harder to see what you were going to get, but it's a good thing. Is it a good player? Is it a great player? That's kind of your field that you're looking at with versus, like, is he going to make any impact or is he going to make a lot, which could be a much larger variance. But that's enough nerd talk on that. This
Well,
is a math class.
yeah, it is. I mean, it is interesting though, because essentially, like, uh, when when you apply what we sort of projected into game situations, which is one of the things that I'm doing with some of the projections that I'm going to roll out on the SEC team previews, as well as having those on the Missouri preview. And I just completed the Missouri preview. What I thought was funny is, uh, like Tony Perkins ended up with basically the same points per game average as he did last year at Iowa. Mark Mitchell increased, but not significantly. And that, like, because he's also going to be on the floor sharing possessions with Tony Perkins and
Mhm.
Tamar Bates. Tamar Bates, I think, was averaging about 13 or so points a game. I actually looked it up, what he had in league play, and I want to say it was like 16 points a game. Um, but I think for the season, I had him at 12 or 13, and
Mhm.
Mark Mitchell right about the same, and Tony at 14, and if you have those three guys that are reliably scoring, there's no reason why. And I think, like, this is where you kind of get into um, one of the things that I did want to bring up, which is you had talked, at least, we haven't really talked about it on any podcast, or haven't really discussed it that I can remember in any of our posts online, but talking about surplus.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things that we were kind of discussing, because as I'm like prepping all these previews, I've got all these like projections going in. I'm like, wait, like, these possessions don't add up. Like, we need to crunch them down. Like, like, this is how I'm going to have to present it for everybody. And you're like, no. Like having a surplus is considered a good thing, because, like,
Mhm.
if you have projections and you have to squeeze your production into a smaller number, that's a good thing. So how did like the surplus sort of come about?
I it's just something that I was looking at when I was putting these together. If you read my article last fall, not long before last season started, I wrote an article for Rock M Plus, kind of having some questions about whether Mizzou had enough offensive production. And by that, I don't mean whether they had enough guys that are, on the floor for offense, but whether they had enough guys that had a history and a demonstrated ability to utilize enough possessions to make the game work. And put very simply, someone's got to shoot the ball. That's with the shot clock, someone's got to shoot the ball. So you've got 65, 70 possessions, maybe 75 in a game. Someone has got to either turn the ball over or shoot it on every one of those possessions. That's just the way it works. The way Mizzou's team was built last year is that they had a lot of guys who fell lower on the usage rate spectrum. And what that means simply is those guys didn't end enough possessions to really make the math work. So you kind of had to stretch, say, a Nick Honor. I think he was at 13 or so percent usage when he was on Kobe Brown's team. Last year, he was pushing up towards 20%. That's a huge, huge, huge increase. I mean, it's completely different world. So when you looked at games where Nick Honor was forcing shots in the lane that often didn't end well, that's what I'm talking about. He had to take those shots. Someone has to take those shots, because if he's not doing it, someone else is going to have to take a shot that they're not normally comfortable with taking. So putting that all together with these projections, I looked at each player individually as opposed to a team, and kind of looked at where they would ideally fit on the minutes and usage spectrum. Okay, so you've got 100% of possessions used. So with teams that had guys that they have a bulk of guys that my individual projections say are much above 100%, you've got what's called a surplus, or what I'm calling a surplus, meaning that you've got enough guys on the team that have a demonstrated history or projected ability to take more shots than the team needs. Last year, Mizzou would have ranked last in that, and that showed. This year, I have them about third or fourth in the SEC. And some teams are like Ole Miss, I believe, is number one. They're up at like 110%. They've got a surplus because they brought in a bunch of high usage, high minutes guys, and they're going to have to cut those possessions out. Typically, that's a good thing. It can end up bad if you've got guys arguing over shots. It can lead to locker room issues. But from an offensive numbers perspective, that's a good problem to have, because if you've got a guy like, say, Tamar Bates, who last year was overextended a little bit, like, hey, stop taking this bad shot. Stop taking this bad shot. Only take these good shots because we got other guys to do the rest. His numbers go up. That's optimal. So Mizzou's in a good position, but they've kind of got to massage the egos, so to speak. You've got to keep a good locker room in that situation when, Marquez Warwick's coming over and he's the all-time leading point scorer at Northern Kentucky. He's used to putting up shots. If he buys into, hey, you're more of a secondary guy, great. Same with Jacob Cruz. He was letting it fly left and right. Everything we've heard, those guys have bought in, but it's the preseason, So once the bullets start flying, once shots going up, shots start going up, things can get a little hairy, especially if you're not winning. But that's kind of just my weird thought process of this, that a surplus, an extra amount of projected possessions is good. Last year, Mizzou did not have that. Even when I tried to stretch the numbers, say like, oh, let's move this guy up to take a few more shots a game, you're getting right at the bottom of the league. And if you didn't do that, you were well below everyone else. And I'm not using that as evidence to say that's why Mizzou was winless in the conference. But when you take out a Caleb Grill and a John Tonje, guys who figured prominently into that, it's not easy, or it's not hard to see how this thing unraveled real quick. I mean, it was stretched to the max, and you pull two threads out, it's gone. Where this year, I'm not saying you want to lose anyone, but you have a little bit more cushion if a guy's not performing, if a guy has an ankle injury, and misses a few games. It's less likely that you're going to have everything just kind of fall apart from an offense perspective.
Right. And I think like that's, one of the things that I, wanted to kind of get to is this idea of, obviously like we all had to sit through and watch last season. I think most people that are reasonable understood the impact of losing, Caleb Grill and whether Tanji was fully healthy or not is sort of, beside the point. Like you didn't get what you thought you were going to get from him either way. And I think, when you then factor into, okay, now we're going to have to just pump possessions through Sean East. We're going to have to scale up Tamar Bates. And we're going to have to use Nick Honor in ways that Nick Honor has never really been good at, like driving the ball to the basket and, things like that, versus now, very much so 1 through 15, regardless of, how you feel about the freshmen, those guys are, at least, athletic Division I bodies. And I think like this kind of gets into one of the things that I was kind of talking with Matt Klein about on our podcast was not only like taking this team and what are they going to do offensively, but how are they going to close the gap on areas where they've been so bad, and he, I think it's impossible not to kind of admit that, he's watching the same things that we're watching. So it's obvious, that it was very important for them to not only have, guys who could score the basketball, but guys who could defend, guys who can force turnovers, and guys who could rebound. And like it's so obvious. Like you look at, Perkins Mitchell, you look at Caleb Grill, who was a great rebounder. Jacob Cruz was, a good rebounder, last year. You have athleticism in the freshman and sophomore classes and length. And you have, Josh Gray, who, has a reputation of being a great rebounder. So it's one of those things, like if they're able to somehow like, okay, now we're stopping the loss of possessions that we're getting on the defensive end, and now we have a surplus of offense on the offensive end. It's one of the reasons why I think you and I both sort of feel that Missouri may be one of the more overlooked teams in the SEC.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also say that the SEC is a tough league this year, and there's a lot of teams. I'm a buyer on Alabama. I might surprise you to hear me say that. I think Nate Oates will still manage to underachieve somehow because of him. Sorry, that's just how I feel.
Well, right, like there's, I mean,
I'm not going to get into the whole league, but just,
I mean, with respect to Alabama, it's almost easy to overlook because they did make the Final Four last year. Like they were horrible on defense the entire year, and they did not like exactly finish in the top 5 at KenPom or anything. Like they were still like only 14th in KenPom because their defense was so bad, and it's not even like they figured it out defensively.
right.
Like the defense was still like not great. They just got kind of lucky when North Carolina, RJ Davis couldn't hit a 3, and they barely beat that team. So it's just like, okay, we always oversell teams in March, like what they did in March. If it's a team that makes a run, obviously, if you're UConn, you win back-to-back championships, you can crow a little bit, but yeah, to me, it speaks a lot of like the same level of, everybody getting excited about like Arkansas's Sweet 16 and Elite 8 and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, I mean, they didn't really have to beat anybody. Like they got really good draws, and that happens. And like, I'm not saying you should apologize for it, but we need to take that into account when we talk about like what we expect you to do the next season.
So I do think that Alabama is probably the class of the league. I don't know that they're a national championship caliber team, at least when you look at it going into the tournament. Anything can happen in March. They might win it all, and I might have to come back here and say Nate Oates is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
If they don't end up with their roster, if they don't end up as a protected seed, it's going to be a hugely disappointing season.
And they have huge expectations. That's the other part of it. So anyway, Alabama, I think, might be a little bit of a step ahead of everyone else. But, I mean, you look at teams 2 through about 14, and we've got 16 this year, 2 through at least 13. You've got teams that can all beat up on each other, and I wouldn't be surprised if any team 2 through 13 routinely beat the other. It's going to be a real dogfight in the middle. So, yes, I do believe Mizzou is much improved, but, the margins this year are going to be thin. Mizzou was incredibly good in close games year 1. They were incredibly bad in close games year 2. If you're just about average, you're probably going to end up about 10th or 11th in the league, which now is still in tournament contention. But that's kind of the dance you have to do. I think Mizzou is in a much, much better spot than they were this time last year. Especially with the numbers, but you never really know until the games start going. And Mizzou probably didn't do itself a whole lot of favors with its non-conference schedule, but we're not going to get into that again. I don't want to go on another tirade. So, I think Mizzou's roster is in a much, much better spot than it was. And I think they have the makings of being a team that can be very, very competitive and, on the right night, beat a lot of good teams. They can also potentially lose to some bad ones. I've got a whole series of questions running on Rock M Plus right now. They have questions that I have about the season, and some of those are addressed in there. Today was rebounding, if you're interested in that. So, yeah, there's questions, but I think there's more answers this year. Probably than even year 1, honestly.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that was sort of another thing that, I can't remember if I actually talked on the air or if that was off the air, but we were kind of talking about, some of the garbage time stuff with Ken Pomeroy and, and using, Missouri 2 years ago as a perfect example. Like, the top of their rotation was able to sort of extend and play with anybody. But the second they went to, deep in their bench, like they weren't able to beat, like bad teams. And so like they would have these like 38-point leads and they would end up winning by 22. and like that reflected poorly on their overall performance in a lot of the analytics sites. And it's also that does impact your net score, which can impact your seeding, but overall, like seeding tends to look at strength of record, wins above bubble, things like that. Um, and
Shout out
so,
to Bart Torvik for being included in the selection sheets this year.
oh yeah, yeah. Um,
another
but
nerd taking over the world. Bart's good people. He's got a great site, best free site for my money.
and I would also, if anybody that is listening to this probably has read Study Hall at some point, one of the main reasons why the math in Study Hall is as good as it is because I got a lot of help from Bart.
Mhm.
So I took over these things from Bill Connolly, and Bill is like, admittedly, he's not a big basketball guy. He was still using a lot of the NBA numbers um, for some of the metrics. And so in my trying to adjust for the college, like the algorithms, just like, they sometimes talk back at you. And so I asked Bart for help, and he kindly stepped in. Um, but yeah, so like as far as like, the league is concerned, like this really is, I'm going through and I'm getting, the masses picks right now.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons why I always like getting the masses picks is um, you're always going to get like the homer picks, right? You, myself, Matt Harris, even though we consider ourselves to be, uh, independent thinkers, we are still Mizzou basketball fans. We want Mizzou basketball to do well. So, maybe Harris is a little different than you and I, but you like, we
I think
both have,
Harris would rather be right than let me do win.
yeah, there's some truth to that. But this idea of, essentially like every year I come into a basketball season hoping for the best, and that can affect how you see the team.
Mhm.
So even like last year, like I probably talked you guys into liking the team more than we should have. Despite seeing the flaws before the season, like you still like it's hard to fight through our Mizzou colored glasses. And so the masses come in and they submit their own picks. And so like we ask people that are fans of all these SEC teams, and you do end up getting their own homer biases, but they end up kind of washing everything out. And I think like that's why it ends up being really nice to get that. Um, and one of the things that you are seeing is there is sort of an agreement on who we think is going to be at the top. There seems to be an agreement that there's going to be a pretty big middle. Uh, and then really what it comes down to, is, can you win on a Wednesday night, in Starkville, or, can you, flip a result, in Nashville? Can you take down Tennessee or Alabama or Auburn at home when they come in? And that's where you end up kind of getting, the standings where they are. It's where you end up getting the tiebreakers. Um, I feel like whenever I end up like submitting my final picks, I hedge a lot of bets. Um, Thankfully, we're not gambling on it. But it is trying to sort of explain like I like this team to this degree. Here's sort of where we see what they could be. And I do think that our previews this year are going to be better than they've been in years past because of the projections that you put together, along with the coaching math that I worked out, and trying to kind of figure some of those, the slot minutes is what I'm calling them. If you're on the Rock and Plus forums, you can kind of go. There's a discussion on slot minutes. I have Missouri slot minutes up there. I plan on posting more coaches that we're kind of going with, and I think it's an interesting topic in determining kind of like where how, like I was saying before, how a coach uses their rotation, and it makes things a little easier to sort of project what you're going to get from different guys. Practices started. I told you, like,
Yeah.
I didn't really want to take this past 30 minutes, and we are past 30 minutes. there's just not a lot going on.
Yeah.
We do have a exhibition game that they did. Mizzou finally announce it, or is that still only Lincoln that
They have
has it?
not officially announced it, but it's been confirmed.
Yeah, it's we've confirmed it through sources. Um,
Sources.
it is happening. Yeah, hashtag sources. Uh, it is happening. It is the same day as a football game. I think they're trying to determine when the football game is going to be played.
That would be my guess. It's the same day as Mizzou plays at Alabama in football, so I'm guessing they're going to try and avoid not overlapping, and they're playing Lincoln University, which there might be another Lincoln University. This topic came up, but it's the one in Jeff City, so the travel logistics aren't a real big issue if you want to flip the game from 11 or 6, whatever. They're right down the road. So
Yeah,
my guess is that's probably playing into why that matchup happened on that day, and they're going to be a little flexible with the timing. And I mentioned on Twitter that if you're Mizzou, I think a great deal would be to have the exhibition game and then have a watch party for the football game there. Get some concession sales and have some folks in there watching and enjoying it together since it's a road game, big road game for the football team. So that could be a fun afternoon, but we'll see. They have. I'm not sure if you've had the podcast since then, but they have had one big nod to the fans with the new uniforms, and by new,
oh yeah.
So I think
Matt Harris is very excited about it.
That's the only thing that gets him excited is fabric.
Yeah, it's vintage uniforms.
I think you're probably getting between maybe not the transfers so much, but I think you're kind of getting a little bit of a nod to the fan base there. Yeah, we had a tough season. Yes, we know you guys like these. Here they are. Which it's a good thing. I think that shows that the powers that be are receptive to acknowledging that last year was a bit of a disaster, and they want to keep the fans engaged to the extent that they can. And I think that's oddly it's a big thing. So people love those things. I think it's more that Mizzou was good when they wore them than it is actually the aesthetics. I think they're very fine, but people love them. So I say it's fabric. Put them on.
What better way to get the fans excited than to just line up quad 4 opponents through the entire month of November? I swear.
But they're wearing the uniforms everyone likes.
Yeah, the uniforms get people excited. The opponents maybe not. Yeah.
I mean, I'm an admitted critic of uniform choice, especially with the football program. But credit to Dennis Gates. He's already surpassed Eli Drinkwitz in his quest for finding a palatable and elite uniform combination. I don't know what he has against the Block M. I don't know another school that wears those on the helmets that has bigger brand recognition than Mizzou. So I say go for it. It's on our freaking hill.
Yeah, I will say, other than the sort of flames, I guess they're supposed to be like tiger stripes on the shorts.
Oh yeah, those are bad.
I really like their uniform redo that they had a few years back. I still like those uniforms. I think they're good uniforms.
I think the black and white ones are both sharp. Sans flames.
Yeah, I know the gold. They weren't real popular. I was not in love with them, but I didn't mind them as much.
They could have worked with different shorts.
My only issue with them was really especially on those gold ones, those flames just look worse because they're black.
Right. It looked like the early 2010 football jerseys with the gold shirts and the whatever black stuff this was. It's not a good look. Just stick with solid colors, with some nice accents, and you can look sharp. We don't need to go over the top here. Classic is good. I will say keep your let's not go for anthracite. I think anthracite for pretty much everybody looks dumb. Especially those ones with the script tiger on it last year.
I did not like those.
Those might have been the worst basketball or really any sport uniforms I've seen Mizzou wear. Those were
and I'm sure you also saw that that Kansas is doing their script uniforms, not the script, but like their
Circus
traditional
letters, yeah.
circus letters, I guess is that's a good way to describe it. But they're going to that. So like I'm a fan of like there's just like big, like just bold classic uniforms. Like I do like the simplicity of old school uniforms. I like the Fighting Illini.
Mhm.
I think I saw it on Twitter or something like that. Maybe it was even in our own Slack chat. Somebody said, because it says fighting and it has their number and Illini, and somebody's just oh, if like fighting one Illini sounds a lot better than fighting 30 Illini. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty great. I hadn't thought about that. But I do like those uniforms too, like the classic Fighting Illini. So it'll be good. Hopefully, like with Missouri kind of going with their classics, Illinois go with their classics in the game, Kansas go with their classics, and it'll be like 1990 all over again. We'll all be very happy.
Yep, I agree, and we just need to get those shorts shortened up, right? I mean, we got to have them like tight up and.
Well,
up
I mean, they are getting shorter than they used to. So I'm sure we have like a lot of WNBA viewers on our listening feed, and if we don't, so Diana Taurasi finally retired, and again, like one of my favorite comments about Diana, she was sort of like walking off the floor, everybody's standing and applauding, and I mean, really, like Taurasi is one of the goats of women's basketball. She's terrific. But somebody said, like, that woman's from a different era. Look at her shorts. And she had shorts like down to her knees, which, for the kids now, like that's how when I was playing, like you wanted big baggy shorts. Like, Michael Jordan kind of started it and they just kept kind of going down and down and down. And so until it got ridiculous. Like there were guys wearing shorts that were down to their like calves. And so I'm a fan of like it. At least it needs to be above the knee, and I do like that some guys are kind of wearing them a little bit higher. I don't need anything higher than that though. I don't need anything higher than like mid thigh. Like I don't need anything tight like that. Having worn those when I was like early in high school, like I do not want those uniforms.
I think we've kind of reached a good point in the basketball world where we've went from really short to really long, and now we're just kind of right. The length isn't and the bagginess isn't really notable. They're just shorts, and I think that's a good point. But to really get back to the early '90s uniforms, you got to have those, where the shorts are like this long, and on a big guy, that's rather You go back and look at some of those pictures, and it's like I don't even think that guy needed to wear a jockstrap. It's like wearing bicycle shorts, and it's no joke.
There's not a lot of room to move around.
But they had the long socks to make up for it, so they kind of covered the leg in a different way. I prefer how it is now. I'm more.
You can
open to seeing lower legs than inner thighs.
Calves are okay. Hip sockets not as much.
I would rather be more exposed down at the lower leg than the upper leg. We'll just pay for it. So anyway, I think we've hit the wall on that.
Yeah, I think that means it's definitely time to wrap this up. I hope everybody tuned in for last week's double interview. I thought Matt Klein was really great. I thought Ken Pomeroy was great. Thank you to both those guys for taking the time to sort of hang out with me for a bit. Dive Cuts itself as a podcast is going to take a couple weeks off, and in a couple weeks, Sam, like we are really bearing down on when the season is starting. Once the season kicks off, we will go weekly. What day that happens, I don't know. We're still going live for Rock and Plus subscribers. We will most likely stick with that plan. I don't know if it'll be Thursdays. The preseason it kind of moved around, or early season kind of moved around because they don't have like the set league schedule, which is usually Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday. So we'll get that figured out. We'll let everybody know, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. Watkins, do you have anything else that you want to hit on before we get out of here?
Nope, I think I've exhausted our listeners' patience with the short conversation, so I think we're good.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you did enjoy this podcast, thank you. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast feed wherever you download and listen to your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store. If you are on Spotify, we are on Spotify. You can find us there at Rock M Radio. If you're watching us on YouTube, you like the viewership as well, make sure you're subscribed, hit like, all that kind of stuff. And if you are subscribed, you also get episodes before the box score, our new Olympic sports podcast, Majority Rules. Matthew Gustafson is doing these great volleyball interviews for all the volleyball fans out there. Make sure you check that out. Make sure you're reading everything over at the flagship rockmnation.com. Please take the time to head over to rockm.plus and subscribe if you are not already. You can give this gentleman a follow on Twitter at Data Mizzou. You can see it there on the screen. I tweet sometimes, but not very often. You can see, most of the time, kind of trying to man the Rock M Nation account. But I'm at Santee Snelling. We will see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.